Well, I want to go to another story here. State of Indiana. Well, I don't know. As we always say, are these things unbelievable or just outrageous or both? But that's the case of the Pendleton two political prisoners in Indiana, and we're going to get into the whole piece, but they are seeking their freedom now after decades in prison, including decades in solitary confinement. We're very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Two Black, who is a communications representative for the Defense Committee for the Pendleton Two, a poet and organizer, and the host of the Black Miss podcast, which I can highly recommend. Black, appreciate you joining us here on the show.
Thanks for having me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. This is very important. I'd never heard of this, so you brought it to our attention. So the Pendleton Two, I guess we'll just sort of walk through this, but two individuals who are seeking their freedom, political prisoners, and essentially they have been, railroaded for standing up inside of Indiana state prisons against racist prison gangs of guards. So there's a lot to this. Mm-hmm. So maybe just give us the initial capsule view of who are the Pendleton Two and why have they spent decades, many of which in solitary confinement in Indiana state prisons?
Well, like you said, there's a lot to it. We would need more time to get into all the details. That's how bad it goes. But the general story is there was an inmate by the name of Lincoln Love who was being viciously beaten by the guards in the prison. And Christopher Naeem Trotter and John Balagoon Cole intervened to save his life. And all the violence that ensued after that was instigated by the guards themselves, who were part of a group that we now know, we did not know at the time, called the Sons of Light, which is a KKK splinter group. As in they were an offshoot group of the KKK. And that is actually in a deposition from one of the guards that worked at the prison by the name of Michael Richardson, who says that their kids, the kids of the guards, used to play with the Ku Klux Klan robes. And they had recruitment within the prison. So they beat up Lincoln Love. It was in the maximum restraint unit on the pretext of a searching the cell, and this happens often. This was not an anomaly by any stretch. There was already class action lawsuits prior to this in 1985. I just want to make sure we note the setting. This is in 1985, February 1st, at the Indiana Reformatory Prison that is now known as Pendleton Correctional Facility. But there had been other uprisings in Michigan City and Indiana as well. So just to give that context. But yeah, so Lincoln Love was beat unmercifully, and they had illegal batons. They tear gassed his cell. They handcuffed him, and then they beat the hell out of him. Right. Balagoon initially hears about this from the prisoners in the maximum restraint unit. They give him word. He initially tries to go see where Lincoln Love is to see what's going on. He goes back, gets a series of other prisoners, and that's where Christopher Naeem Trotter comes in. And they try to check to see if Lincoln Love was okay. At this point, no violence had occurred other than the guards themselves, who started this. When they tried to see if he was okay, they met resistance. They thought he was in what was called the captain's office at the time. They learned he's later in the infirmary, so they have to go through population. And as they head towards the infirmary, they're trying to avoid being shot at by the guards. There's people on the intercoms calling for reinforcements. They get trapped within the infirmary to try to check on Lincoln Love. They have to fight their way out, and this is where the main kind of so-called riot takes place, to survive and to save their lives, because the order that they all say was to kill them and to kill Lincoln Love. And even when Lincoln Love was dragged out of his cell with his head bleeding, like he's bleeding from his head, the word they said to the guards was, this is going to happen to the rest of y'all. So this is their state of mind while they're fighting against these guards who, as we noted, many were a part of the Klan, or a part of a Klan splinter group. So they take a few hostages to try to save their lives. They get into the cell house J of the prison. They take the prison over for roughly 15 hours. They call the press, and then they had a series of demands, whether that was to be political organizing within prison, because they were also part of a group called the Black Dragons, which was not a gang, but a political organization that united prisoners so they could fight against the actual, conditions and the guards and the DOC, the Department of Correction, that's perpetuating these conditions. It called for more black at the time. More there was no black guards, so they were asking for more black guards. I don't know how well that would work, but at the time they were doing what they could figure out. Um, they were asking for better conditions for food, for sanitary, just sanitary conditions and cleaning supplies. Because another thing I forgot to say, one of the things that occurred was when this fight first broke out with Lincoln Love. Lincoln Love and many other prisoners were banging the cells for cleaning supplies because they didn't have cleaning supplies, and cleaning supplies is something a lot of us take for granted. So imagine not even being able to get soap or being able to wash yourself or toothpaste or whatever else you would need to take care of yourself. So again, coming back to the situation itself, these are the demands they're making. There was a standoff. Media came in, National Guard. Nobody was killed. There were hostages or guards that were hurt because they did have to defend themselves. So they did have shanks, but nobody was killed. And in response for this, they get sent to trial. Primarily Naeem and Balagoon, who make up the Pendleton 2, they received the bulk of the charges. It was an all-white jury. If you read if you read the transcriptions of the trial, anytime that their defense team tried to raise the conditions like I laid out in the prison, the fact that guards regularly beat up inmates, any of these things was always objected. It was an all-white jury in Madison County, Indiana, where Anderson is. It was always objected. The prosecutor and the judge openly fraternized with the jury. I mean, you can literally read anytime the defense would say, can we ask this guard about why, particularly Michael Richards, who I noted earlier, was involved in a class action lawsuit against the prison prior to this actual rebellion, they wouldn't allow it into court. And because even some of the guards who worked there, particularly probably the ones who weren't part of the Sons of Light, felt endangered because the conditions were so bad that it created a hostile environment even amongst prisoners because the conditions were that terrible. Moving forward, because again, there's a lot of other details. Naeem and Balagoon are sentenced to 142 years for Naeem and then 84 years for Balagoon. And then Naeem spent 20 years in solitary confinement, and Balagoon spent 32 years and 5 months, I believe, in solitary confinement. They're still locked up today in Wabash Correctional Facility. So that was the case, and then they've tried to push back several times. Even Naeem had his sentence vacated in 2018, which means that that the court was supposed to resentence him, hopefully to a fairer sentence. And honestly, he'd already served enough time for the crimes that they claim he actually committed. The judge that claimed that gave him the vacated sentence was removed from the bench, and they put in a new judge. Again, this is in Madison County, Indiana, and that judge said, he said, "quote I need to look out for my brothers. We need to have my brothers back," is what he said. This is all documented, and he resentenced Naeem to 122 years. So, yeah. So that's the situation we're in. So we have a committee right now that formed earlier this year that is working to bring just awareness to the case. Because I mean, even me personally, I didn't know about this probably more than maybe a year ago at this point. I was ashamed because I like to consider myself well informed about political prisoners, but I didn't know this had happened. I didn't know Indiana had political prisoners. I know the United States has plenty. So we're working on just raising an awareness campaign and just trying to bring light, no pun intended, to the story itself.
It's just so wild to me that these people protected somebody from literally being murdered by a prison guard branch of the KKK. No prison guard, nothing. It doesn't no one has been held accountable for nearly killing a man at all from the Sons of Light or whatever this group called themselves.
There was one person that did go to prison for violating civil rights. The FBI investigated, which also it makes the fact that they're in prison this long so ridiculous, because someone actually did get in trouble for this. And like I said, there were several lawsuits. Now, we've never had any expose of the Sons of Light at all. That's one of our demands, actually, is for a federal investigation into the Sons of Light. But other than that, no. And just for the record, Lincoln Love did survive. They did successfully save his life. But unfortunately, in 2020, Lincoln Love passed away from COVID, or what we just call medical neglect. If anyone knows the situation of COVID in prison. So I just want to put that on record as well.
So now
No, I
go
think
ahead.
that's
Eugene.
crucially important, the medical neglect element, and it just brings me to one other element of I maybe can guess to some degree what it is, but I mean, could you talk a little bit about the conditions that the Pendleton Two have been held in? I mean, the solitary confinement, the state of it, because I feel not only did that sort of spark the whole incident, but I always feel in these sorts of situations, it's par for the course that when you're a political prisoner, they go above and beyond to try to make your situation intolerable.
Yeah, certainly. So even since I've been involved, and I have not been involved for that long as I noted, I want to shout out IDOC Watch, who's been involved in this much longer and informed me about this as well as the other comrades. But even as the time the committee has started, we've had several situations that have happened just to those two, and it was basically just neglect. Like Balagoon had a medical incident that was an emergency. Actually, had a tumor, and we could not get any notification on what was going on. And we had to do a phone zap. For people who don't know what a phone zap is, that's when you rally or mobilize a bunch of people to call the prison and demand that the family is given information. We had to do a phone zap because, they weren't telling us anything. Now, thankfully, eventually he was able to get the surgery and, proceed, and he's still here with us, thankfully. But, this is just regularly the kind of conditions that they've had to experience. Indiana built what's called SHU units, security housing units, and that is just simply more solitary confining units. And they built those units in the early 90s in response, and I got to give credit to Shaka Shakur, another political prisoner, for putting me onto this. They built those units in response to what was an Indiana and a larger political prisoner, or just larger prisoner movement going on throughout the country and the state of Indiana. And what they started doing, like I talked about the Black Dragons earlier, who was organizing prisons, they started sending them off to different places, and a lot of them got sent to these SHU units. And that's where most of this solitary confinement took place. So they built up SHU units to create a more intolerable environment for prisoners to sit in. And Indiana itself, to my knowledge, has the most long-term sentences of any state in the country. Right. Wow. Or the colony, so has the most. So it's a state where people are locked up. There's just a lot of aging prisoners. So even if you agreed with that they were wrong in what they did, for the record, and our committee does not. But even if you agreed with that, it would still make sense to release them just simply off compassionate release, off the fact that these are just older gentlemen. And I also, one more point, just to speak to their character. I was just talking with Naeem he just wrote me a few weeks ago, and both of these gentlemen are still actively involved in these causes. They have not lost their faith. They have not lost their, sense of revolutionary vigor. Naeem is trying to expose the medical neglect that goes on in prison, and was telling me about the various ways that he's watched people die and how he wants to bring light to that. Balagoon, after he got his actual surgery, was trying to fight for rights while he was in the infirmary for other prisoners right after he got out of surgery. Some of us told him to calm down because we wanted him to survive. He's like, I still have to fight. So these are very noble gentlemen as well, who definitely are still involved. And if anyone wants to listen on Black Myths podcast, we did interview both of them. But I just want to speak to their character as well, not out of the sense of trying to appeal to any kind of innocence, but just to show people that the state has not broken them.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, especially considering you mentioned the amount of time they spent in solitary confinement, one of them 32 years. I mean, if anybody's ever read about what solitary confinement does to the mind, I mean, the fact that they're still mentally even there after that long, literally spent isolated like that, is just speaks to a level of mental resilience on top of everything else. Yes. But what is it that your organization is doing to try to get them released? What is it that other people can do who are watching this and who are, I'm sure, as horrified as I am to like hear this story and to know that this is happening to people for basically defending another person's life from, again, the KKK? Like, it can't be reiterated enough.
Yeah.
But what is it that people, what is it that your organization is doing? And then what is it that other people can do to like join in the effort?
Well, I mean, the first thing anybody listening can do is sign our petitions or our letters. If you go on Twitter under simply just Free the Pendleton 2 or the Pendleton 2 at the Pendleton 2, you can click on the link tree and please sign the petition that goes to the judge and the judge, the prosecutor, and the governor. You know, it's understated sometimes because we print these letters out. It's understated sometimes how much simply just flooding an office with letters and support and letting them know that there's people out there that care about them, how much that can create pressure. We don't think that that's the only thing that needs to happen, but for people listening, particularly folks who don't live in the state of Indiana, please do that. Hopefully that link is also in the chat or that can be shared. But again, go to the Pendleton 2 Twitter and click on the link tree, and at the very top is the link that you can click on, and you don't have to write the letter. You just simply fill it out. It's a Google form, so it's very easy. Doesn't take that much time, but every letter counts. Obviously, just create awareness about the story. For us ourselves, we're working on multiple fronts. On the legal front, you know, we're trying different things at different angles. But really, what we're trying to do is build a mass movement. Because it's not going to be enough to simply just fight the courts. I think the courts have demonstrated that there's not much that's going to happen there. So we need bodies. We need people involved. So we're working, you know, across different coalitions, whether that be with churches, whether that be with local organizations, even if they don't always ideologically align with everything that we may believe. We're just trying to, you know, bring people together so we can, you know, storm this on multiple fronts, whether that's direct action, whether that's holding, you know, whether that's on the legal front, whether that's, you know, bum rushing the courthouse, you know, in a nonviolent way for anyone who wants to try to indict me for that. You know, whatever we can do, you know, that's, you know, that we're trying to build on multiple fronts. So if you are in Indiana or in the Midwest, you know, please contact me, please DM me. I will link you in, and we can start to begin talking on anything you'd like to be involved in.
Right on. Well, Black, we appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and we'll continue to follow it as things move forward with the Pendleton 2. But once again, thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Yeah, thank you.